Young Red Dragon with this episode. This installment. So you can see I've finished up the belly scales. I just did a quick coat of just the bleach bone, Ushabti bone, on the rest of the underbelly scales. And see the ones in the middle a little bit more done. I did the horns, the same thing. And then I just kind of tidied some stuff up. Its spines on its back, for lack of a better term, covered with the wraith bone, just so we can. I'm going to contrast those later, and I did all the his little bony bits here on his wings, his claws, his teeth, all that I did with wraith bone, so we can hit that with the skeleton horde later on, and have those things done up real quick. So for the wing membrane, I'm going to do this a more yellow color, I was saying similar to the wormling. I didn't paint for this video, but kind of inspiring what's going on here. So we're going to do the wing membranes yellow as opposed to the actual like monster manual look of all red, because I think for a miniature that's just kind of boring. So I'm going to start with, again, always using Citadel colors because all I got is Baylor brown. I'm going to start with a darker brown here. We're going to, the wings relatively dark, and then we're going to lighten them up with a wash and a layer. We'll talk about doing some kind of like line work on these. This paint is a little old. It's pretty separated, so I'm going to see how it looks going on here without thinning it, because it's already quite thin. I don't know how well you can see that in the video, but it's quite thin already. So I'm going to start by just giving this a nice once over with the wings. Like the other ones, I'm not going to show the whole thing. I'm not going to paint all the wings for the video as a tutorial. I'm just going to show it to you once or twice. So we'll get these wing sections done up, and once it dries, I'll move on to the next step. So I'm trying to be careful here I don't cover up too much of the red that's already done, because I'd rather just not have to go back and fix it, you know. Trying to do this in a relatively simple manner that even beginners could easily emulate, or if you're just looking for something a little bit different, or want to try a new technique. So here we're going to go a bit more traditional sense of a layer, a wash, and another layer highlight kind of thing. So luckily this paint looks pretty good. We might need a second layer just to get it more solid color, but even though it's pretty separated in the pot, it's still looking real good. So nice about these Nolsgers models that they are already primed, and the primer they use is this nice light gray, which takes other colors on it really well. So I think once we do this section of membrane, that first one should be pretty well dry. Maybe we'll hit it with a second coat real quick, and then we'll move on to the wash. And that's what's going to take a while to dry. Alright, make sure we get all the gray gone. So I see some spots where I wasn't very careful with the contrast earlier on the red scales, and we've got some red poking through. That'll take a couple of coats to cover up, because this paint isn't terribly opaque. It's pretty typical with the yellows of Citadel, where it doesn't have as much coverage right away. In case you're not sure what opaque means, it's more translucent. Opaque would be very not translucent, a paint that would cover up everything underneath it really well. And in general, yellows and whites are not very opaque, and they need more layers. Which is one reason why people don't like painting with yellow in general, which is one reason why I wanted to choose it here. Besides just I like the look of the yellow with the red. Again, makes it kind of stand out. Makes it a little bit different. I thought about doing the wings in more of a like peach flesh tone, but like I said, I kind of want to do yellow to show some different ways we can paint with yellow. Luckily, contrast paints have simplified that a bit, which we'll see on the spines along his back. I'm just going to do straight contrast, and we'll see that gives you good looking yellow with one pass, just one coat. Let's see here. Find these other spots that need another coat. It's not totally dry here, so applying another coat too soon, you're just going to be moving the paint around and not really cover what's underneath as well. That's what I'm trying to show. So it's looking pretty good. I'll hold it back a little bit so you can see. Oop, right out of the shot. Sorry. See, that's quite... From what I'm looking at my screen here, it's pretty yellow. This is more like it's Baylor brown. It is a brown color. Very light. Almost like a dark tan. Which makes me think of the Three Musketeers. D'Artagnan. But because it's so thin, I'm running out real quick, so I get more on my pot, get it on my palette. Mix it up a bit because it is pretty separated. Looks like we'll be able to finish up this whole side of the wings before that first one dries. I think I'll take this opportunity to just kind of mention if people want stuff painted without doing it yourself or without having to buy the supplies or whatever, I do take commissions. On occasion, you can talk to Anthony at the Dragon, or you can find me on Facebook, or send me a message that way. Check out For Whom the Die Rolls on Facebook as well. Contact me through there if you want. Otherwise, the whole point of this is to teach you how to paint. So I'm trying to come at this a bunch of different angles, make sure we're not missing spots. I'm not going to worry about the underside of the wings at this moment, because we're more focused on technique and not just watching me paint this whole thing. Let's try to cover it. So let's focus on this front part. This is where we're going to be really concerned with showing technique. So you can see it's still quite shiny. It's still not dry. So while we wait for that to dry, clean off my brush. Give it a good swirl in the water. And then let's bust out that yellow contrast. Let's take a look at doing these spines while we're waiting for that to dry, since we're looking at yellow. And we'll see how this compares to more traditional technique of kind of building up the yellow color. So contrast yellow is Iandan yellow. At least that's how I pronounce it. I don't know. It's a space elf Eldar name, so pronounce it as you will. So like I said, I painted the spines here with Wraithbone just to have them ready to go, because there was a bit of red on them from painting the red scales earlier. And with the contrast, like we did with the red, you want to be heavy-handed. Don't be shy. I almost said don't be hasty, because I watched Lord of the Rings recently, but really we kind of are being hasty here. The whole point is that we're doing it quick and easy, which is why I love contrast. So you can see those shades going right away. Get those highlights forming immediately, which I think they look even better after it dries. One thing I like about the contrast is that you can control it better than washes. Washes are thinner and tend to flow more readily, whereas with contrast, where you apply it is generally where it stays. Obviously it's not exact because it is a liquid, it's going to flow a little bit, but washes, as we saw with the scales, tend to kind of go where they want. You can't control it as much. So let's work on the rest of these as that brown is drying. See, we got a mold line there on the model, which some people might really bug. Others probably don't care. It's really not that big of a deal. And we'll apply that down between the wings, which I'm not, again, I'm definitely of the opinion, some people will, like, when they're building tanks for 40K, as they build it, they'll paint the inside of it and then close it all up and glue it, which I don't understand, but some people like that. So I'm not that kind of painter. If you can't see it, I'm not going to paint it, or if it's hard to see, I'm not going to worry about it as much. So we have the spines going. Let's see if I can angle this in a way we can see what I'm talking about. Down between the wings. The wings are so close together, it's really hard to see in there and get the brush in there. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. I'll try a little bit. But otherwise, I'm not going to be too concerned with getting that perfect, because you can't really see it anyway. And then, of course, I turn at this angle and I can see it much better. So one more pass over. All right, so there's one layer of contrast on those spines. Let's try to get my light in a better spot so we don't have so much shadow. You can see one layer. All right, our Baylor brown is almost dry, so while we're waiting for that, let's do the other side of the spines. The more complete side, because we can see where the dry brushing happened on the scales. I haven't got a chance to finish up the rest of the red scales with the dry brush. That'll come in time, of course. Get some more out of the pot here. I'll say, if anybody has any other questions about painting or gaming, whether it be RPGs, which obviously this model's for, but we're taking more of a hobby aspect of it. So if you've got questions about miniature wargaming or anything, we can, people like to chat on Facebook or whatever. I don't really have a Discord or anything like that, but people have questions, or if you want to give me some tips, always like improving all the time. I said a couple times I've been doing this for like 17 years or something like that, but anybody can get better. I'm certain I'm far from perfect. I think I'm a pretty good painter, but there's always new things to learn, new techniques to try. I've kind of got stuck in my ways after a while, especially since contrast paints. I've really been settling for what I consider tabletop quality, which is like, it looks good on the table as long as you don't give it too much scrutiny. Whereas the average person would think it looks real good. Other wargamers might be like, oh, well, you should do some dry brushing or whatever, and then, you can apply those advanced techniques. Looks like I got a little bit of wraith bone on my wing there. I'm going to have to tidy up later. Alright, so his spines here are now yellow. Let's see, one coat of yellow contrast, and in yellow, and we got yellow spines, and he's looking pretty good. Set it down for a moment. Rinse this brush off. See what we can do about these wings. Looks pretty dry to me. I know it's still pretty shiny, so we got some spots down here that are still a little wet. See if I can kind of draw that out. Spread it around a bit so it dries a little bit quicker. Just because I want to be able to move on to this wash. The way I'm making this video is I'm currently, nobody's watching live, but I'm streaming it on Twitch, and then I'm kind of exporting it to YouTube, so doing it in separate sections would be more difficult. This way I can just download one file and then upload it to YouTube. Boom, we got video ready for people to check out. So much more concerned about time than I normally would be. Trying to blow in a little bit to help dry. So let's take a look. So next up, I forgot to mention, same as last time, we got Seraphim Sepia, or Sepia, as our wash to give this a bit of a quick shade. It's going to darken the whole thing. The raised areas won't be darkened as much because that's just how the shades work, or wash. I use those terms interchangeably. I think they officially call them shades, but when this product first came out from GW, they called it a wash. Then they changed the name later. I'm not really sure why, so I've always just kind of stuck with wash because that's what it was. And these are kind of like the precursor to contrast paints, where they work very similarly, or you can use them similarly, where they're gonna darken, they're gonna apply a hue color to whatever area you give them. But in the case of shades, it's just it does what it says on the tin. It's just gonna shade it. It's gonna make the color darker overall, and it's gonna settle in the recesses and the places where you're going to want natural shadow. Now you can see where it was a little wet. It's just kind of mixing instead of applying the shade. So you might be focusing on that middle part instead because I did too many coats on the front part. But shades were a godsend when they first came out. They were amazing. They're very translucent, of course, and my favorite thing for them was applying to metals. Good old Nuln Oil. That's not is that what it's called now? Yeah, I can't remember what the paints got remade like 6 or 7 years ago. They completely overhauled their entire line, and they changed all the names of everything. And some of the names I haven't switched over, and some of them I say the wrong ones. But yeah, Nuln Oil. I can't remember what it used to be called. Somebody could comment there. Remind me what the black wash used to be. Oh yeah, I'm totally drawing a blank. I cannot remember what it was. Now it's Nuln Oil, and that's pretty common wash in a lot of different situations. Devlin Mud used to be, people called it liquid talent because you applied it to it was a darker brown, and you applied it to just about anything and it made it look better. I think now it's Agrex Earth Shade, the same thing, different name. Let's take a look at, we'll just wash down the rest of the wing here. That goes all the way down to far down his back, just the way our dragons are put together. Again, we'll apply it relatively heavily. Again, similar to a contrast. You're going to want a fair bit of wash on your brush, so I'm using my nice big Wargame Monster brush from Army Painter. There we go. That's my kind of my go-to shade brush. Alright, let's clean that off. Unfortunately, shades can take a little while to dry, as we saw with the underbelly scales last time. So while we're waiting for that, we can jump right to the claws and teeth, which I'm just going to make a bone color. I was thinking about possibly doing making them black, like a bear's claws are black, but I think bone fits the palette of the model better. More natural look. And I wanted to show off, the simplicity of the contrast system. So, like I said, I painted all the claws and everything with Wraithbone. So now I'm just picking them out with the Skeleton Horde contrast paint, which will give them that super quick color shade highlight all at once. And they should just look like bony protrusions. Skeleton Horde is almost a must if you're going to be painting models, because especially if you're painting anything GW, because they love skulls. I love putting skulls on everything. So Skeleton Horde is super handy for that. Spray the model down with Wraithbone. Give it a nice once over with Skeleton Horde, and you can call it done. Again, you could fancy it up a bit, apply more layers and highlights if you wish. But that's up to you. It's your model. Do what you want with it. See people on Facebook groups about modeling, Warhammer in particular, and asking questions all the time, and people are often, their answers are, do what you want. It's your model. And there's nothing you can do. You can paint it however you want. This red dragon I could paint blue if I wanted to. Kind of defeats the purpose of this tutorial, but just do what you want with your model. Be happy with it is would be my bit of advice, I guess. Do what you want to be happy with it. Some people aren't ever happy with their models because they expect it to look like award-winning things every time, and that's not always going to happen unless you're professional and you win those competitions, but I'm assuming people that are watching this aren't going to be in that position. So almost done here, getting all these little spiky bits he's got on the end of his wings. Try not to touch the other wing while it's drying. Get this last one up top here. Alright, so all of his little bone spots are done, because contrast's the best. And I just realized I forgot about his little ear flappy things on the side of his head. I'm talking about the other video. I was going to do the same thing to them as I did the wing membrane. Luckily, some of this Baylor brown is still wet on my palette. So we're just going to come in here. Let's find a way to hold this so I can keep it in the shot. That's important. Apologies, just not used to painting this way. And we're just going to try to, as close as we can, fill in those membrane parts without going over the red. And see, I'm not doing all of it right now. I'm going to switch to my smaller brush. Well, maybe I don't have to. Just getting those smaller areas. Alright, and let's see, how are we going to hold this? Too much of it's wet. Got to keep it in shot. Alright, let's see. There we go. So again, on the back side, we got the membrane between the red. I'm not going to be as picky about that because you can't see it as well. And then this side, once more. Get here, Space Marine. And then the outside on his left side. Oh, now the wings are in the way of the way I want to hold the brush. Alright, we can see here this isn't perfect, but we can always go back and tidy up the red later. There. Alright. Boy, that wash is taking forever to dry. Definitely thought it'd be good by now. So what I want to show you next with, we're waiting for that wash to dry to kind of explain. So I want to do a little bit of, put the wrong cover on that paintbrush, vein work on the wings to kind of show some line work you can do to kind of fancy it up. At this point, we could definitely call those wings done. We got the shade on, we got the base color, we got the shade. I think that looks just fine. If you were to stick it on the base, obviously assuming all of the wings were done like that, you know, you'd have a decent looking model. Again, for the vast majority of people, that would look perfectly fine and ready to go. I'm not going to settle with it like that for now. I want to give it a little bit more TLC and kind of show off other things that we can do. Alright, so this section of the wing is almost done. It's almost dry. Kind of wish this lamp I had produced some heat, but it's a tiny LED light, so it doesn't. So let's give that another minute to dry up, and what we're going to do is take a finer brush and we'll start by highlighting down the wings, and we'll give it some texture that way, and then we'll take an even lighter color and add some looks like veins kind of going between the different areas and make it look cool. This is just about ready to go. So for the first highlight here, it's going to be pretty similar. I'm going to grab a light brown that looks very similar to Baylor brown, but it's just a little bit lighter. And now that we've applied the wash to it as well, it's darker already anyway. So the Zamesi, I don't know how to say that, Zamesi Desert is going to look even lighter because it's on top of the Baylor brown with the wash. So I'm going to do this as our first highlight. I say first highlight because I'm going to use another, we're going to go back to our Uriel Yellow for the vein work. So we'll take out a bunch of Misty Desert. I'm not sure how much I'll need. We'll give it just a tiny bit of water. It's already a pretty thin paint. Again, being a yellow base, it's pretty transparent and thin. I'll resettle myself here to get in a better position because again, it's hard to hold this to show you what I'm doing. So we're going to paint this onto our most raised up areas. I'm just going to thin this down just a little bit more. For the highlight, we want to stay away from where the shade is in those recesses because those are pretty well set. So we can see that nice brighter yellow without being super different. I don't want it to be like applying a bright yellow right on top because then it'll be too much contrast and we'll lose that little bit of realism we're going for. So I want a more natural buildup of color. Just making it a little bit brighter. Make these wings pop a little bit more. So I'm following this one fold of the wing all the way down first to kind of get my baseline of what I want this to look like. Here we got some irregularity in the model here. It's not perfectly smooth, but you know what? That's fine. We'll just roll with it. Maybe this dragon has a little burnt wing or something. I'm not sure how well you can see those differing colors there. So now we have a couple different layers of color. We have the Baylor brown, we have the shade, so some parts of it are a bit darker. Now we have the Zamesti Desert being a bit lighter. We should get a few different layers in there. Again, just to add some color and get a little bit more realistic looking. Because in real life these things aren't, well, in real life these things don't exist, but you know what I mean, animals and things don't have just a solid color to them. You know, even if you look at your skin, it's going to have different colors in it. So that's our first highlight. I'm going to apply a little bit more on top here. So I want it to be a little bit bolder. And here I'm using the side of my brush a bit because these areas are raised up quite a bit. I don't always paint with the very tip of the brush because you can get very clear brush strokes that way. So I like to use the side of my brush sometimes, and that way I can hit a couple areas at once as well. So hopefully we can see the difference between this kind of middle area and this one that hasn't had the highlight. I think this one looks a lot better. So next up we'll take a look at a little bit of that vein work. And if I were painting a humanoid figure, painting veins, typically I'll do the veins actually darker. You know, think about people, your veins that stick out are going to be blue. If you're lighter skinned, could not get that paint open. Whew. So typically I do it in a lighter color. Sorry, a darker color, but in this case I want it to really stand out, so I'm going to do it in a lighter color. So this is a layer paint Uriel Yellow, which is, I believe, the lightest yellow there is, unless you go all the way to the edge paint range. Oh, I guess I look over at my other paints and I see others. Gotta reach real far away over there. So a couple of the ones we could be using here, we have Sunburst Yellow, which is real bright. Forgot about that one. It's gonna be a Flash Gets Yellow. I think this is an older paint. We can see the style of the, what's the word? The label is different. I believe this is an older paint, so Sunburst Yellow might not even exist anymore. Actually, it looks like it was replaced with Flash Gets. Looks the same. So we might use that if we want to go even further. And then they have another range called Edge Paints, which are a little bit more pastel to really, you know, they're for super fine highlights, which we're probably not going to use here. I want to just get that mixed up so you can see that yellow more. But it's a very bright, I wouldn't call that a bright yellow. It's a very, yeah, pastel yellow. So it's more white. But for now, we're going to stick with the Uriel Yellow. And after I just got that on the palette, I realized I want to go to my finer brush. So for the Zamesi Desert, I was using the Army Painter base coating brush. I know it's totally worn off there to use it so much. So I'm going to move to this my smaller brush, my detail brush here, the Model Master, which again is something I got at BD Bearded Dragon forever ago. Pretty sure he still carries these. This series are a little bit more higher quality brushes. They cost a little bit more, but I like this one because you can get it to a much finer point than the base coat brush. So this is my detail work brush. So what I'm going to do here is just pick out a few spots to apply a little bit of vein work to the wings. So this area where it's real flat, I'm going to add a little bit of veins. Just a couple little lines. I don't think the whole thing needs to be covered in veins. Just kind of connecting different parts. Just to show that the membrane of the wing, you know, it's a delicate area. It's got a little wide there. And again, this gives it some more variety. And this I am applying into the recesses as well as the raised areas because, like I said, we just kind of wanted to stand out and add a little bit of cool definition to it. So I'm not going to apply a ton of these because I think that would be a little overdoing it. I'm also going to use this to highlight some of the really raised areas. But just to get a little bit more definition to it, a little bit more interesting stuff going on. Try not to make all my veins look exactly the same. You could connect some of them if you want. Last one, I'll put one more over here. And we have a little bit of definition, a little bit of vein work. So it's important here for, make sure my palette's in there, is that when you're applying paint to the brush, you don't want to load it up. Right, this is not going to give you nice line work because there's just too much paint on there. What you want to do is one reason why I want to thin it down is so as you pull it away from your pile of paint, you want to twist it to bring your paintbrush to a point so you see how much better that looks. Still looks like there's a lot of paint on there, but it's having trouble focusing on the brush itself. And if it's too much, you can just do it next to the paint and bring it to another point. Twist it so we get it to a nice point, and then you apply it. Alright, so that's it for this one. Next up, we're going to do... Oh, excuse me. Caught in my throat for a second. We're going to take a look at the basing here, where I'm going to kind of make it look like volcanic glass almost, which I'll show you a little bit of varnishing, and then we'll take a look at actual basing materials that some people, like I mentioned before, I've talked to people who say they're a bit intimidated by that, so they just don't do anything with the base and they just leave it black, which honestly can look fine. I definitely subscribe to the camp that it's not done until you base it and you have a complete base. So we'll take a look at that next. So next up we'll see the completed dragon, and we'll do the base, and then we'll have a 100% done model, and hopefully that would be a fun time for everyone. Other than that, stay safe and game on.